My name is Kumiwaleng Friedman, and I am from the Melrose Gallery, and I am hosting tonight's discussion. I have the great pleasure of welcoming our moderator, Thembinkosi Goniwe. He is an artist, an art curator, art historian, and he is currently lecturing at Rhodes University. In addition to that, he is a visiting researcher at the Wits University School of Art. Tonight's discussion is titled The Aesthetic Charge of Pitika Ntuli's Bone Sculptures, and the material we'll be engaging is that of his most recent exhibition that is right now on show at www.themelrose.gallery. Can I please, just before we begin, just discuss a couple of house rules, a few things that we should just be aware of. Can I please ask that all the attendees have their microphones off as well as their cameras off? As mentioned prior, I will repeat it, we will be having a Q&A session. And so you please feel more than welcome and free to ask questions in the Q&A tab. We will try our best to get to as many as possible. Thembinkosi, please do what you do best.
Thank you, Kumi, and welcome everyone. And on behalf of the Melrose Art Gallery, as well as Pitika Ntuli and Ruzy Rusike, I want to thank this opportunity to moderate the exhibition. Just a quick run of how things are going to take place. We'll start a conversation with Ruzy, the curator of the exhibition, and following that, we'll have also Pitika Q&A. And then from Pitika, we'll have Hlonipha to present some ideas around the work. And thereafter, we have Athi Joja. And from Joja, we'll have another Q&A between Pitika and Thembeka Heidi Sincuba. Let me just mention a short bio of my panelist. Ruzy Rusike is an artist, curator, and social activist based in Johannesburg. And she's currently working at Melrose Art Gallery. Hlonipha Mokoena is a professor of history at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research, which is, we call it WISER at University of Witwatersrand. And then we have Athi Joja, who's who's an art critic based in Johannesburg. And lastly, we have Thembeka Heidi Sincuba, who's an artist and a lecturer at the at Rhodes University. I'm sorry for that. So it is great to have these great minds. Without wasting time, I'll ask those who have joined the conversation to follow us, make notes while we are speaking, and also throw questions in the inbox Q&A, as Kumi have said. And after we've made the presentation, we've conversed as panelists, we'll also take those questions. To start, let's invite Ruzy. Hi, Ruzy, how are you?
Hey, Thembinkosi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It has been a journey for you, an exciting one, right?
A journey and a half, let me tell you.
Yeah, because I think, to curate an exhibition of this magnitude, must be a fascinating and enriching experience for you, in particular in this time of lockdown, of course, thanks to coronavirus, which have compelled us, to be in this space we call social distances, and also to transition from face-to-face to social distances, as well as working online. So tell us, what has been significant for you about Pitika's bone sculptures and curatorially?
Yeah.
What has been your strategies to put exhibition? I'm asking because I'm interested in your thoughts, because you speak about these bones as embodiments of triangulity, harmony, and stillness. You also consider these bones, or bone sculpture rather, to be transitory spirit, which the exhibition aligns to the boundless form of time. And of course, I'm taking these notes from our conversation as well as your work in progress essay about the exhibition.
Yeah. Okay, so I think maybe I should begin with my first encounter with the sculptures before, because obviously when we were conceptualizing this exhibition, we were exceptualizing, keeping in mind that we would have a space at the National Arts Festival and people will be able to interact with it physically. So I always thought of it, and when I first encountered the bones, there's a state of consciousness that I obviously encountered them first with. And then when you leave, you are subtly changed in terms of how you think about bone, but also how you think about what Pitika titles them in relationship to what is medium on fire. And I think that it would be nice if maybe Kumi can just show the audience, I guess, one of the sculptures. So that's one of the sculptures. So I think that when you see it, your consciousness adjusts in terms of what it is when you see the bones. And I realized that even when I speak of the bones, I had to speak of it within the realm of the Nguni word amatambo ukubula, and that by definition is divination bones. And these bones are used with regards to traditional healers. That's where it comes from. And I knew that I was also working with these artworks, but also a living artwork, a living art archive of Pitika Ntuli. So I had to think about all these little concepts as well as what people have previously written about Pitika in relationship to his work. And I found that Ngugi wa Thiong'o referred to Pitika's work as being part of that of the oracle, meaning that which is equivalent to that of literature. So it goes back to what I was saying previously about being subtly changed in terms of what your consciousness is, because to think and to read these works is like a song. You can't just experience it within what's it called, like when you think of a song, you can't just experience one verse and say I've listened to the song. You've had to listen to the end and experience all those subtleties and those layers that start to come out. So that's what I experienced when I saw it, and that's when relating to the spirit in terms of the transcendentary spirit, there's different layers within that. So yeah.
Thanks, Ruzy. Thanks, Ruzy. Also, you speak about, there's a beautiful idea I would like you to pick up on. You
Okay.
call your curatorial strategy a platforming of an idea.
Uh-huh.
Which, its purpose is to ignite this new consciousness. And addition to that, you also speak about an exhibition as a form of setting up a new agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe we are working in this time where things are taking place online. So I'm curious to hear from you, how has it been for you to curate this exhibition virtually as a platform of an idea, or platforming an idea, also to set up this new agenda? I'm also asking this question because for those who have visited the online exhibition, it's rich, it's overlaid. It's not only the 45 bones, these bones are accompanied by poems. There are also other intervention by different creative, intellectual, scholars, cultural producers. It's kind of a range. Itself is an installation.
Yeah.
So can you speak to us about this platforming of an idea, which now has become this multi-layered?
Okay, so okay, thanks, Thembinkosi. That's hectic. um, okay, so obviously, I've always understood the practice of exhibition gives one a sense of range, reach, possibilities, and what can be imagined when we platform an idea. And when I say platform, I think of the plot and the form, similar to stage and theater. It basically suggests a structure that can host other behaviors. So, although the exhibition echoes existing ideas, there's a larger unfolding of messages that sets forth a new agenda. And this challenges already. Then we start to understand the established knowledge systems of content, established knowledge systems around sculpture and spirituality, exhibition, and what an audience is. So when I thought about the digital platform, I knew that these ideas, essentially when I was platforming it, everything was destroyed. My platform in terms of where it was going to be exhibited was destroyed because of COVID, and that physicality was gone. And the form in terms of the three-dimensional works were, the experience was, I needed to rethink experience of an artwork. So then I started to understand that and when you exhibit something online, essentially what's happening is that you're trading within the realm of the future. And within that, what I'm saying is that the internet offers many possibilities. There's no past, present, and future. Everything that is accessible for people who are in different time zones, and we're all experiencing something simultaneously or different time zones. So I also understood that at the same time, generationally speaking, my audience was boundless. So I couldn't, when I started to consider the audience that were going to be participating within the bones, I understood that it wasn't just going to be I wasn't in control anymore. It was open to whoever was going to experience it. So therefore, the I and even the process of curating was challenged, because myself as a curator, I've been taught that the curator is always that which basically speaks to what it is that how it is that a person's supposed to experience an artwork. So even though I set up a platform, the experience was never going to be bound to one experience that I set up. So the whole platforming was completely destroyed, essentially. So that's why I thought of that idea of curating. And I think that it's important to bring into the fact that when you're speaking, when you're touching on the layers, all the collaborators, and I just want to also take this moment to thank them, all the collaborators contributed significantly, and there was no I in this project. And even myself as a curator, I felt that I couldn't curate without the platform, trusting within the platform being Art Fundi, trusting within my team being the Maurits Gallery, and even my director Craig Mark, trusting within Pitika to trust me that I can do this, and Antoinette and his entire team trusting within me. So I think that when it comes to curating and that process, and even creating online, it's a different industry, it's a different trading of ideas, it's a different understanding of platforming, what it is that you actually conceptualizing or think about or thinking of. So I guess that, you know what, it's a new agenda, and it's an intimate process, but it's also public. And to bring spirituality and technology together, and the fragility of the bones together within this platform, was complicated. But I guess that the voices and the many voices that collaborated within this online exhibition, um, helped me in terms of what I wanted to achieve. So I hope
I
that
think,
answers.
no, thank you, Rose. I think to a greater, in fact, not even to a greater, there's no measure, there's no question. It's a successful exhibition. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
I do get the idea of the platforming, because I think for me, what the exhibition does, it also shifts, just listening to you, from this idea of the individual writing,
Yeah.
the narrative. It means it's a collective, it's a communal. And I think these are the ideas also Pitika talks about more often when he speaks about his work, his poetry, and also his activism. So I think that has translated into that kind of, if you want to call it, a form of communal work. But also, I quite like the idea you're talking about, that COVID did not only destroy the idea of the physical, it created another possibility of thinking,
Yes.
you know. So, and I think this is also, I think Pitika is going to speak on this definitely in a short while, about what it means to take something that has expired its lifetime, like these bones, and give them a different life, or to inject a new life. Because if the idea was destroyed, to go to the gallery, to go to the museum, so now for it to be on this platform, it takes a different life on its own.
Yeah.
And I think it's exciting. Just a last question, Ruzy, because this exhibition comes at a time when we are witnessing a range, or rather a rising trajectory of exhibition, such as surveys or retrospective of significant Black artists. I'm thinking, for example, of two exhibitions currently. One was of Senhlenge, was Prince, which was curated by Boitumelo at the Wits Museum, Arts Museum. Also, there was also a David Kolwane exhibition, which took place in Cape Town, and then it moved to Johannesburg at the Standard Bank Gallery and also at the Wits Arts Museum. So we are seeing this shift, so to speak, from collective exhibition of artists where you have group artists to this solo. You know, I mean, what was it for you to curate? Because I'm just seeing the gap of age, experience. You know, Pitika is a living ancestor. So you're young, you know, so what was it for you to curate this monumental figure? And also at this time when we are seeing this so-called rising exhibition or retrospective exhibition of veteran artists like Pitika, David Kolwane, Sentleng and many others. Can you talk to us about what it means for you to curate this historical exhibition?
Okay, so obviously this exhibition came to me by being appointed at the Maurits Gallery as the head curator. So an exhibition like this was always inevitable for me, but Pitika trusted me to take hold of his exhibition regardless of the age gap. And I think that just to touch on the fact that Pitika and I come from different generations, I think that that's what brings in there's a different layer of understanding and complexity that the bones in itself have, because particularly these bones come from different times, yet there's understanding in which he understands the bones. So I think that we are always, that's what I learned from exhibiting this exhibition online, is that we are so bound to time that we forgot how boundless we are as beings. And that's when the spirituality we brings into understanding that there's you know, when it comes to spirituality, we always place spirituality within this boundless understanding of our own articulation of it. But when it comes to our own physicality within the bones, and when we see the bones, we always bound it within a construct. So what the gallery did inevitably is that they instead of leaving the exhibition and postponing it for another time, we understood that, you know, this exhibition needs to be platformed no matter what. And even though it's going to be traveling to other spaces such as 11 Hayes and the Durban Art Gallery, and we're hoping to also take it internationally as well, what we have done is that we became innovative in terms of how we think of exhibitions, and paying, like touching on what you're saying about Sam's show and also about Dave's show. Those are, when you think of veterans and exhibiting veterans, there's a certain amount of fragility that you have to also exhibit them within, because I'm also coming from an understanding within my own time and my own contemporary understanding, because there's a certain amount of intimacy that you can understand a work if you knew the time that it was curated. But what I understood even with Pitika, and what Pitika even did for me is he made me very courageous of understanding that I can't think of myself as bound to a certain idea or construct of myself, nor can I bound him within this legacy of what a veteran is, or of what his artworks can achieve. And that's why, touching on what Ngugi even says when he speaks of Pitika, he speaks of his work as being oracle, because it's both literature and performative, and performance never stops. When you hear a song, the song will continuously play in your mind. So what I've done is I've taken that song or that song that we are left with, and I've curated it on this platform, and I've understood it within my way, but also through the collaborators and with the collaborators. But I don't know if that answers your question properly, but I think that in truth, the above exhibitions were platformed within a museum, and the gallery has initiated what a gallery is able to do within the context of curating, as well as in the context of knowledge and archives, and challenging the already established norm, because we always think of galleries as being something that's commercial. But I think that it's not by chance that the Maurits Gallery always exhibits artists in relationship to the veterans. So we always try to basically challenge that idea, or even challenge what is art, and who is allowed to curate and not create, and who's allowed to platform, and where are we supposed to platform my idea. But I think that going forward, this exhibition would never have been this exhibition now going forward, and if I think about it, and going to 11 Haze as well as, for example, Durban Art Gallery. There's no ways I was going to take into consideration the collaborators, because collaboration was never part of it, but now it's definitely part of the process, you know? So I think that we miss that collaborative process a lot in terms of art. So yeah.
Thanks. You've answered, and also you've opened other avenues to think. And I would like to shift to the man of the hour, Pitika. You know, man, it's a beautiful. I quite like the dialogue between the elder and the young, the youth. Just the what is it? The handing over, or the handing over of this knowledge, because you are a living vessel. You know, with all this. Yeah, we are living account, Pitika. I've said that. And the title itself, Pitika, Azibuyele Emasisweni. The title of this exhibition, it's loaded. You know, I mean, it translates into to return to the source. And that for me, it just recalls that title, like Amilcar Cabral's essay of the same title. It also alludes to Amy Caesar's classic poem, you know, Return to My Native Land. You know, surely there are many other references. Can you please like unpack for us this title for you, these bones, as a form of returning to the source?
No, thank you very much. And also, I'm so happy to see the young, curators, here, and the young critics, here. This generational, discussion is of particular importance to me. When we say Azibuyele Emasisweni, we are saying that we need to go back to our groundings. We really need to go back to who we are, to pick up interrupted traditions of art making, of art practice, of art criticism, and also of how we relate to our own art history from a perspective of our own culture, from a perspective of our own spirituality, as opposed to be speaking as photocopies of Western knowledge systems. So when we say then, as Azibuyele Emasisweni, when you go over to Cabral, he's returned to the source. Now, let's say, what is it? Cabral, same as Sekou Toure and Kwame Nkrumah, are the people who wanted a civilizational Africa. They were not interested in nation states, but they wanted a civilizational Africa where all Africa joined by culture and this. They were pushing that idea. That is why in 1966, in Dakar, Senegal, the first festival of arts and culture that was bringing African cultures, the paintings, the writers, the intellectuals close together to say to the world, we are here ready to build a new Africa, Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Malagasy. And then in 1977, 11 years after that, there was Festac in Lagos, in Nigeria, which was the second arts and culture festival. And what was very interesting in that, not a single Western news house allowed their people to go and cover what Africa was doing, because they realized that Africa was planning something that is essentially Africa that cannot be actually controlled by Western powers as such. So when we then, I say, Azibuyele Emasisweni, is that we need to try to find out as to whether we as Africans, who we are. I would like to quote Hugh Masekela, who said, if we don't teach our children their culture and who they are, when in the future they ask them who they are, they will say, our parents say we used to be Africans. So Azibuyele Emasisweni is to try to remove that notion that we were something else, but to return in our own minds to be our own agents, an agency for change determined by us, our art, our culture, our beliefs, and practically everything that makes us African.
Thank you, Pitika. You've touched on some of the questions I was going to ask, but let me just rethink it. Let's speak about the sculpture, because what I'm hearing here, I'm hearing a sense of a Pan-Africanist thought. I'm hearing here a sense of Africanism of one. And these are some of the questions that some of our audience have been sending to us to say, or to ask us to ask, what is this saying about what it means to be Africa in this time, in the 21st century? So it seems we are answering that question by this exhibition. And when one looks at these sculptures, in particular the bone sculptures, and you've used some of the titles, you've used expressions such as pregnancy of the mind, pregnant possibilities, you know what I mean? And these are literal and these are metaphorical. Can you also just take us to these sculptures themselves as visual objects, but also as signifiers of other things, aesthetic, culture, language, social history? You know what I mean? Can you just talk about what it is that these sculptures are pregnant with? Or what is this, you know, you want us to take from this exhibition?
Yeah, what had happened, as Ruzy had said, that this exhibition was meant to be a very physical exhibition that was going to go to a number of exhibitions and probably also in abroad. But when COVID-19 came, then we had to change tech. But built into it, the issue of spirituality has been in there. As you are aware that in Africa, what we say is that when you throw bones, when you throw bones, you divine. Originally, this exhibition was meant to be divining a state of the nation that is in a state of anomy, to look at what's happening in our country, the rise of femicide in our country, the issue of rapes, the issues of murder, femicide, xenophobia, corruption, greed. All of these things that are actually affecting us need to be addressed in different ways. And I felt that art, and particularly sculpture, and also using bones, becomes very, 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 very important. That I'm throwing up these bones so that to divine the state of the nation. While confronted with the pandemic right now, the very monies that are directed towards those kind of pandemics are being corrupted. So these bones then will need to get us to talk about who we are, as a people. We have been massacred. We are talking about the bones of the people who died in Craddock. We are talking about the bones in Sharpeville. We are talking about the bones in Bishop. We are talking about the bridge of bones from Africa to America and to Europe during the Middle Passage. So that's why for me these bones are so particularly important. They talk about our history, where we have been. The bones of Makada, the left-handed, the bones of Shaga, the bones of Mshweshwe, all of these bones are summoned, right now, to come and address the issue of the pandemic and the need for us to heal ourselves physically, spiritually, in all manners where healing should be manifest.
Thanks, Pitika. Yes, these bones. You are a sculptor, you're a poet, you're an activist. We are many things. In these bones, you chisel them, you grill them, you chop them, you tattoo them, you dot them, you ingrain them. You do all of these things. There's something about your creative process. You bring beads into them, you embed these beads in them. You bring metal, they're like mixed media one way or another. They are 3-dimensional. And the way also these bones come to life, they're part of a kind of a practice I would like to talk about, because, you travel to places to collect these bones, and then you perform these rituals to cleanse these bones, to summon it to a different life. And then you've talked about how you recycle these bones as found object. And of course, this is common in contemporary art practice, whether we look at El Anatswa, for example, his work, or we look at Keasan, or we look at Willie Bester, we have also recycled. Can you speak about this creative process of recycling the discard, or giving life to objects that have, whose life has expired, what that means for you? Because I think that for me is very important to touch on. to take these bones whose life has expired, these animals who are dead, and give them a different value, a new meaning. So what it means that as a creative producer, but also as a spiritual healer.
Remember what we as a Guni people say. We say, umuntu akalahlwa. You never throw a person away. However bad the person is, you recycle that person. I was talking to Nduduzo Mkatini in one of his pieces where he talks about, he composes about bones. And somewhere he talks about umtagati. Umtagati who's a witch or a wizard. And he speaks that when you catch that mtagati, you don't kill the mtagati. You know that mtagati has got certain powers. You recycle that mtagati. Now, asking about this, the piece that is looking at us right now in front of us here, when you look at the spaces in between here, from one angle, we are going to find that one of them, that empty space is an egg. It's an egg form. When you look at another one, it is like a tear. When you look at the other one, it is like a crescent, moon. In between these kind of spaces, there are ancestral forces and spirits that are speaking. When you look at the one where the bottom kind of a pregnancy, comes, you can actually even see a bird that is rising. When you start combining all of these things together, then we are going to get in, deeper, yet other meanings, because when I work upon my art, I am not alone. I am with Eshu, the trickster god. I'm with Kagichane, the trickster god, who create chaos in order to obviate the need for systems. That's what these bones for me are working at. Looking at the one in front of us here, this side, you are going to see that head is a map of Africa. And you've got that bone that is on it, where we put in Intelezi, that the Shagan people or the Makoma people used to pour that in Intelezi to protect people when the people were at war. So that in other words, these bones in themselves are nothing else but also power symbols.
Someone has asked me.
This is therefore recycling then, is that when we die, we are going to be recycled. Mugabe said it very, very, very nicely. He said, people think I'm dying and I'm going away. They don't know. As an African, I'm going to get another job. I'm going to be an ancestor. So he'll be recycled as an ancestor.
I think you've answered Kubu Zulu's question, because she was asking for us or for you to speak about the Nguni symbolism of these bones. And I think you've touched on that. But just for me, I want us to also return to the title, of this conversation, the aesthetic effect or the aesthetic charge. There's something haunting about these bones. As the one we are looking, they have also, bones have been used as also tools, weapons. So there's a lot to think about these bones, Pitika. But also, these bones are sculptures now. They are arriving at us as art object, imbued with all these meanings, also with all these functions. And they are part of a traditions, which you and I have spoken in other contexts. I would like you to talk to us briefly, because I'm looking at these sculptures. I'm thinking of other traditions that have come before us. I'm thinking of, for example, you've lived in Europe, you live in America, you've traveled in some part of the continent. Here you are in South Africa, back home. You have returned to the source. And then you've studied, you've taught art. Where would you place, or how would you locate these sculptures when you think of movements such as Negritude, for example, in Paris, or when we think of the Nigerian artists who developed certain aesthetics, whether we are talking about the Zaire Art Society Nigeria, led by Uche Okeke and other key artists there, or we come home, we remember Sidney Kumalo, Cecil Squatness, and all of them as Riamba, Amadlozi, for example. There's also next door Zimbabwean stone sculptures. We can also go to West Africa, the wooden mask, which Picasso and many others appropriated. So when I look at these sculptures, including your stone sculptures and including the wheelbarrows, there's something that takes me back to Sidney Kumalo, for example, to Ezra Mkhayem, to Dumile, to Jackson Hlongwane, to Noria Mabaso, as well as to the contemporary Willie Bester. Can you speak to us about this tradition?
That's a very, 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 very powerful, tradition, that, because from Lucas Tole right to Ezrom to Sydney, Kumalo, you name them. All of these, people were people whom the system desired that their lives did not matter. They did not matter. They were black. There were no art schools. There were no art colleges, except maybe Ndaleni or a few of the others. And all of those people we are talking about are the people I'm standing on their shoulders, on them, because they were responding to the very same things that I was responding to. When you are in your country and we are made to feel that you do not actually belong to your country. In other words, you're not even your mother's child or your father's child, or you don't even own part of that land which ancestrally has been yours. So all the people you have decided to choose art, in themselves to express themselves. Let's talk about Sidney Kumalo, for instance. He was commissioned at one stage by a mine, I don't know whether it was in Kinross, where he made a bull. And this bull was on his knees, it was kneeling, the bull was falling, but the bull at the same time was rising. It was a very dialectic of this bull. They never actually quite understood it, except one policeman who picked it up, that this bull symbolizes the African people. They are not fallen down. They are just about to rise up against us. So we have got those histories to look at. You look at the Willie Bester. All of the metals that he actually collects, people don't actually realize that those metals in themselves are embodiments of spirits. How many people have touched the doors of the cars that Willie Bester worked on? How many people have touched the gears? What spirits have those people left in them? Because when you pick up a material like that, you are not just picking up that material, you are picking up that material's history. We are picking up that material's dream. Like when I wake up on a bone, if colonialism was like this, it would be so nice that you come into a place and you leave the people just as they look like. So when we make art, even when I work a bone, I don't change the shape of the bone. I leave the bone as a bone so that people can see the bone as a bone, but the bone acquires a certain level of spiritual height that it is. So all I do, maybe I'm not an artist, maybe all I have to do is to help these bones to attain their own ideal, because they're powerful, they're beautiful. Right now, we're even getting rid of the bones, isn't it? We are now having knee replacements. We are going to have shoulder replacements, whatever else it is. So the bones are actually being pushed away to be replaced by plastic. That's why I'm bringing all of them right back here to know that life is in here and these bones carry that life and you cannot deny it.
Lastly, Pitika, before we give Hlonipha a chance to engage us, we talk about aesthetics, we talk about language, two of the very key important dimensions, in your work. And we've discussed this also in different contexts where we've asked whose aesthetics, whose language, and I know you've been involved in a historical project where in recent developments, with you being part of the Pan-Africanist movement, being part of the African Renaissance, being part of the indigenous knowledge systems, you part of the group of Africans asking us to begin to use your title, to return to the source, to explore African ways of being in the world. Can you speak to us about this notion too, like the aesthetics, what they mean to you, the language, of the sculpture, but also the language you must think this sculpture through, or with which we have to begin to engage them?
The first, let's clear the issue of aesthetics. According to Western world, aesthetics is a science of beauty, right? It is a science of beauty where you are going to look at something, you know, beautiful and to theorize. So now when I ask people about my bones, what is it? What happened when you saw the bone for the first time? Everybody said, it really hit my heart. I began sweating. I did not know who I was. People were responding emotionally. They were responding, you know, to the feelings. And the African aesthetics starts from the feeling before it even gets actually into the brain where you do the analysis, whereas the Western world that is predicated on Newtonian physics, the physics of binary of opposites, everything has got to be broken down, analyzed, broken into pieces until it ends up as a theory somewhere else, divorced from the emotional content of what a work of art carries and actually pushes forward. So an African aesthetic is not an aesthetic of an individual. It is a communal aesthetic. It is a philosophical aesthetic. It is a spiritual aesthetic. That I'm having collaborators with, to work with me, it's because it is not about me, it's about Ubuntu. I am because you are. So that collective that's where we are going to find an aesthetics. So in other words, how we are going to say is that these bones are not here to fill people with a lot of knowledge and a lot of ideas. What these bones aim to do is to disrupt how people feel and to disrupt how people think so that they should begin to think differently. That's what my aim is.
Oh, just to extend so that it can also give Hlonipha an entry point, because you also speak in your essay decolonialism or decolonialization, decoloniality, all of these terms. So how are these sculptures contributing or participating in that dialogue of decolonization? Of course, whether we go back to Fanon, when he talks about creating a new man, the form of decolonization, he was asking, or we go to Ngungi, whom Ruzy invoked at some point, to decolonize the mind. Or now we go to the current kind of vogue of the Latin Americans, Walter Ntuli. So can you talk briefly about this discourse on decolonizing? So how are these bones participating in that project of decolonizing within the context of Africa or Africa, both in the continent and also in the diaspora or the world over?
The world of Walter Mignolo and the people of the Duke University, one of their main thrusts is epistemic disobedience. What they are doing it because they're working from a university, the issues of the epistemic. But that becomes again problematic because the Western world has got this tendency to break things down so analytically that wholeness, in a sense, completely disappears. Epistemology seems to be a world on its own where it is part of a culture, which is part of a cosmological, part of the axiological, part of all of those theories that help people get a grasp. So now what has happened is that in my essay, The Return of the Minkisi, my starting point is simply that we have forgotten who we are. Colonialism came over to us, we swallowed it hook, line, and sinker to a point that we have almost ceased to be African people as we are really meant to be. So at the moment, coloniality, that's template of oppression that carries us. We think European, we think Western, we feel Western, we create Western, we come with theories that are, that are Western. They are good for their own culture. They are good for everybody else, maybe, I suppose. But what we are saying is that as African people, we need to know who you are, because we say, if you don't know where you come from, you won't know where you are going. And if you don't know where you are going, any taxi will take you there.
Thank you, Prof. Let's give an opportunity to Hlonipha Mokoena, who is also going to help us to think and to think around these issues that Pitika has raised and Ruzy has touched on. And we've discussed with Hlonipha briefly around the sculptures and also other issues. Some of those issues are, I'll just mention three: the idea of the remains, and the question of what it means to be human in this time of COVID, when we are fragile, we are disposed, and also we've talked about this idea of animal, the relation between animal and human. So can we hear from Hlonipha what she thinks we should think about when we look at these sculptures? Thank you to you, sister.
Thembinkosi, thank you for making me sound like a sage, and that I'm gonna say something that is gonna be groundbreaking and earth-shattering. And thank you so much to Ruzy for putting this together. Thembinkosi, obviously. Thank you to the other panelists, and thank you so much to Pitika Ntuli for giving all of us this opportunity to basically speak directly to his works of art, to his sculptures. As you know, Thembinkosi, so I'm gonna sort of direct some of my comments to you because it just makes it easier. I like to talk about jazz music as a kind of preface to thinking about the creation of art. And so while I was thinking about this panel, this conversation, I thought about Miles Davis's album, Bitches Brew, and particularly the cover of the album, because the cover of the album was done in basically the 1960s, at a time when, again, there was a whole set of utopias and visionaries about what the world would look like in the future. And what is interesting is that in that image, you basically see two people who are possibly lovers. But again, because, and I think Pitika Ntuli knows this, in Africa, whenever you are representing a couple, the couple looks the same. You never quite see who's the man and who's the woman, because that was the whole almost African aesthetic. So if you go to any art gallery in the world and they show you and they say, oh, this is an image of a couple from the Dogon people, the man looks like the woman looks like the man is the warrior, the woman is the warrior, etc., etc. There's never a kind of like, oh, this is male, this is female. And Miles Davis got that right. You see the figures from behind. You can't tell which one is the male, which one is the female, but you assume from the embrace. And again, it is a famous embrace from also Mali, where you see the Dogon sculpture. And the man has got, or the male figure has got his arm around the woman's shoulder, but he's touching her breast. So this is where you can see who's the male and who's the female. And the two figures are also in the same kind of embrace. And you get a sense of an apocalypse. You get a sense that the world is over because they are looking out into a horizon, and all you can see in the horizon are basically waves and waves of water. And there is this radiating force that's coming from one of the heads of the two figures, and it's sort of connecting them to the sky. And so, there's other things that are happening on the cover, but I just wanted to focus on those two figures. This absence of binary, but the presence of two-ness, two bodies, two separate bodies. They are together, but they are also not together, in the sense that you can see that they are two different human beings, but they are one because they are united in this vision of a kind of ruin in front of them. But it's not quite a ruin because it's not emptiness. And this is what I was thinking about when I was sort of trying to think, putting together all my thoughts for tonight's conversation. Is how do you recreate that moment in which you can have two people, two-ness, separateness, but also oneness, because they are connected by the fact that they are looking at something. And again, the album never quite tells you what they are looking at. They are looking out into the horizon, and they are anticipating some kind of future because they are young. So it's not two old bodies, it's quite young bodies, and you can see that they are anticipating something, but you don't know what it is that they are anticipating. So from that Miles Davis vision, and some of you may have listened to two versions of the album that was released, and then I think Columbia Records or some other record company released what is called the Complete Bitches Brew. So if you listen to the Complete Bitches Brew, you listen to all the material that was not put in the original recording, then the image starts to make more sense, because there are albums like, there are songs on there like Yafet, which is a very kind of African ideology, the idea of African spirituality, again, being invoked. Now,
Yes.
thinking about these bones, thinking about not about ruin as such, as the end of the world, but ruin as an anticipation of a new world. Sorry, Pitika, did you want to come in? I just heard someone comment.
No, I just wanted to say that you've touched on a very, very, very important thing when you touch on the issues of jazz, when you teach, when you touch on the issues of improvisation.
Yes.
If you are guided by a script of either Chopin's and nocturnes or Beethoven's, Emperor, piano, we have to follow what is written, down there. And yet, when we come over to jazz, you are led by the spirit. Those rings that are actually in front in there, what Miles Davis is saying is that Azibuyele Emasisweni, let us return to where we are to go and rebuild the citadels that were destroyed, that belonged to us.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, this is why I thought perhaps if we start with jazz, because as I say, it's one of my favorite ways to preface a conversation about art, because the two things were so intertwined at the time when jazz sort of shifted from being a kind of popular dance music towards bebop and hard bop and all these other forms of more spiritual, more engaged, more political jazz. There was exactly that idea of reconnecting with Africa, this kind of Black diaspora, but also this idea that there is a specifically African aesthetic that needs to be recovered through sound, through music, and through, as Pitika talks about, improvisation. So then how do you improvise on a hard surface like bone? How do you begin to make a bone, which is supposed to be a hard surface, into an improvisational object, into an object that looks malleable, that you can manipulate? Because I think this is what the sculptures also evoke, the idea that a jawbone can become something different, a hip bone can become something different, a joint can become something different. So that presentation of bones as malleable, as we talked about it with you, is something that projects us into a space of thinking about the post-human. So who do we become once we become bone? Do we become ancestors? What kind of ancestors do we become? What shape or form do we take? But also this world that is meant to come after the human is done. Because I mean, there's a whole question of how far is the human project going to take us? At what point is the human project going to fail? And we're going to have to accept the fact that we have actually ruined the world rather than actually created the world. Are we ever going to get to a point where we become something more than just flesh and bone? And so I think for me, those were the other issues that came up when we were discussing this question of what does it mean to think of this exhibition as signaling the post-human, the thing that comes after humanity has exhausted itself, essentially. And we don't even know what that exhaustion will look like. As I say, this is why I refer to the Miles Davis cover, which presents that post-human moment as actually a reinvigorating moment rather than a destruction. And then the other thing that we spoke about was this question of morphing. Because as I say, I think the bones sort of almost, when you watch these sci-fi movies like Transformers, they sort of they are moving into a particular state, but they are in a state of becoming, because when you look at them from different angles, the sculptures are becoming different things as you walk around them. And again, here it's like a three-dimensional space that you are entering, where nothing is ever final. The story continues after you have stopped looking at the sculpture. So that sense of continuity, even in the ruins, of continuity, even after the end of our own life cycle. And here I want to refer to one of my favorite authors, and Pitika Ntuli may know, Makemafuze. So one of the most difficult parts of writing about Makemafuze is that just before Makemafuze died, one of the things that he wrote was a whole series of articles that are titled in Zulu, Umuntu Gafi Apele. And I just from a perspective of translating, how do you translate the idea that when a person dies, that is not the end of them? And I mean, I struggle just with translating that concept. Somehow the idea is about reincarnation, but not quite. When we die, that is not the end of us. Somehow there's something that continues to live. Is it our DNA? Is it our spirituality? Is it our ancestral? And Mike Mafuza wrote a whole series in which he presented all these very complicated ideas that challenge Christian theology. And essentially, as I say, in Zulu, when you say umuntu kafi aphele, you could actually just be meaning even something like poverty, where you say, you know, no matter how poor a person becomes, it doesn't finish them. They are still a person. And so for me, that was also one of the things that was evoked, the difficulty of translating an author who was writing in the 1920s about death. And yet he came up with so many complicated ideas about the meaning of the end of life and how it is that actually there is no such thing as the end of life, that all life actually continues even beyond our sort of physical bond that ties us to the earth. And then I think the final comment that I want to make is about this expression, Azibuyele Emasisweni, because I think Pitika has picked one interpretation, but the other interpretation of it that is very interesting is the fact that ubusisa in Zulu is actually a social relationship. Because what happens is when you are destitute, a person who's got livestock will give you a cow or give you a goat and say nyakusisa. So what that means is whatever comes out of you are looking after that livestock, but whatever is birthed of that livestock is yours. And it's a very, very kind of interesting social relationship because the person has given you a piece of their property, quote unquote. But if you look after it well and it reproduces, all the offspring from that livestock is yours. So usisile, so ubuyela emasisweni is also to bring back to the owner what they had originally lent to you. It's a way of saying, you helped me out and now I'm bringing it back. But also interestingly, African kings used to use it as a way to keep tabs on their followers, because then you give somebody livestock and they cannot bring it back without actually signaling that they are leaving you. So when they bring back ubuyisa emasisweni, they are sort of saying, okay, thanks so much, but now I'm leaving. And so African kings will say, but why are you bringing back the cattle? And you have no explanation other than to say, hey, I'm going. And there were all sorts of conflicts about exactly this livestock that SCCC with. And there's so many histories to tell about those stories, about why it was that people had these social relationships that were based on this, almost like an economic transaction, but not quite. A loan system, but not quite. Because again, colonizers used to, or settlers used to describe it as a bazaar. They used to call it like a bazaar loaning system in which you give somebody something, they keep the offspring, but then you still retain a right to the original, which is exactly the thing that they then have to bring back if they decide that they no longer want to be in that social relationship with you. So I was also thinking about that, and how do you write about that particular social relationship in relation to the sculpture? Where is it just the source, or is it actually also about these other set of social relationships of helping people out, of livestock, of connecting to people through animals, essentially, because now you are using the animal as a stand-in in some way for the social relationship that you've created with the person by loaning them your cattle, by loaning them livestock. So I think I'm going to stop there. And Thembinkosi, if you want to ask me questions, I don't think I've used up my 10 minutes. So I don't want to go on. So those were the kind of themes that jumped out of me, beginning with that Miles Davis image on the cover of Bitches Brew.
Thank you, Hlonipha. I'll just pick up on two things. Of course, I'll invite also my panelists if they want to break on your presentation. I can see Pitika's hands. Because there are questions that are coming. I also want to factor them as they are coming. One of the things we are touching, Hlonipha, is the question of, because even with Fuza, that's a beautiful project. Because Pitika asking us in a simple, basic, but yet complex question of how we are not only returning to the source literally to go and recuperate. Yes, we are doing that. We have to. Even it means to go and retrieve those so-called writers who are buried, who are hidden, writers who are distorted. Of course, to retrieve them, we are going to come out differently. And here we are also speaking of work of memory, work of remembering. We are speaking here of orality, because some of the histories of our experiences of our people, by my people, African people, and all of the people who've been affected by this so-called evil project called colonialism, right? Their histories have been destroyed. Their memories have been tainted. So even just to go back, the challenge, and it's so huge, but at the same time, it provides an experience that you can't substitute for anything else, and art has that power to do so. Why I'm saying that? Because when I look at these bones, you're talking about this idea of becoming. I was saying to Ruzy, there's a way in which Pitika seems to be subjecting us into this motion, this movement between the figurative. You can identify, you can relate. At the same time, we are forced also to think abstractly. So they move from that which you can identify or relate to, but at the same time, they are also abstract. So there are these worlds that I play. And isn't this what we do when we begin to retrieve things that we never experience in real time, whether we read them through books or we hear them through. So again, the question of sonic, right? So there's something about sound in this, whether you are reading Miles Davis, you're listening to, and also the Duduzo, for example, music, Amatambo, whether we go to Zimgawane, for example, or Hebitwaedi, Huma Segela, and even Malombo, these many sounds that our people have created. Even you go to West Africa, you listen to these instruments, So what I'm saying, there's a lot. There's also sonic, just by looking, visually. We are touching on all of those things. I'm just picking up things maybe our colleagues might want to take. One last point I wanted to just also highlight so that we can maybe discuss is this question of we seem to fear that which we don't know, the end of the world, the end of human. Why we are so scared of death, right? I always have this fascination as a young person to see the bloody witch. I always want that craft, especially now. Imagine how much money would I make if I'd be able to fly with that kind of plume, right? So why our technologies are never retrieved and kind of made in ways in which are useful? These are the systems we are talking about. How, for example, cow, the loaning or the borrowing, these kind of transactions. Isn't what Pitika is asking us to go back to those ways of relating, of being in the world? Again, if you think of, I want to think here with via Bonaventure's beautiful, invocation of the notion of the voodoo, the notion of witchcraft as a science, because the West have struggled to understand it. And we have been forced not to think it in terms of utagata as something that it's science in its own form. But because of, this project we call colonialism via anthropology and many other ways in which these things are discredited, whereas they have, what we mean gains, advantages. So I just want to flag those. So we'll keep your time, Hlonipha. Let's donate it to Pitika and then we move to Athi. Pitika.
Before you move on, I think that for me, because I think that's the other question that came up, was this question of what does decoloniality mean? I always go back to Sheikh Anta Diop, and Sheikh Anta Diop defines in some ways in the 1960s what a decolonial project would look like, and he says it's to give back to the African people their Promethean consciousness. And for me, that term Promethean consciousness is actually much more important than any physical or spiritual or intellectual or even scientific arguments about what comes after colonialism. Because just to try and unpack what it means to steal fire from the gods, to recreate the world by recreating that moment in which humanity steals fire from the gods, and to make that into a modern project is quite a challenging way to think about what comes after coloniality.
Just to be very brief, I'm so happy that Hlonipha, you have brought in a number of very powerful things. Your use of the imagery of jazz and of improvisation that invokes the utopias, that gets rid of binaries. It speaks about cyclicality as an organizing principle in African thought. That whatever you do, you move around and you come. When we go to the apostolic church or Mazayoni, you are in a circle when you worship, isn't it? And the priest is right in the middle, and the congregations, they are rotating around it. When you drink, at home, you have your calabash, which is the earth that moves. You rotate it in 24 hours, crossing day and night, and the calabash gets to the side, and then it comes up with its own, revolution. Those are the things that Africa had set it up. We are talking about harmonies, and when you talk about Azibuyele Emasisweni in terms of the second version that we have gone, we would not be having issues like xenophobia, in our country, which is thoroughly, totally, in a sense, un-African. When you come in from anywhere else, you get into that CISA in a process. So that harmonization, then, Hlonipha, that you actually brought it about that which umuntu agafi, because afile, we recycle that person. That's why we recycle the bones. We recycle practically everything else in order to seek harmony amongst ourselves.
Thanks, Pitika. I want to take up this concept recycle later because there's something that is not for me. To recycle. Isn't there another word maybe in our language that could speak? When you say recycle now with this gadget and machine, you just put something that it comes out as something else. There's something like not really sounding kind of for
one sentence, the Thembinkosi, when we say ukubuyisa, when a person dies, we have a ceremony, ukubuyisa that person to complete the cycle. So therefore, when Hlonipha says a person doesn't die, when a person dies, siyambuyisa, so that he comes over straight into us, so the spirit remains with us.
Maybe where does decolonial come in with language? Maybe we need to start to be careful with these words. Ukubuyisa and recycling, for me, they don't translate to mean the same thing, right? Even with those rituals, you can't say, we are going to recycle my father with.
Can I just suggest, Thembi, ukuvusa?
Yes.
Ukuvusa. Ukuvusa.
Ukuvuselela. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Perhaps we need to take this notion of returning to our languages, not as a form of exotic or going back to tribalism, to ask, because some of these English words, they don't do service to us in terms of the experience or their world. I just wanted to know that. Let's give Athi Joja an opportunity to help us, as Hlonipha has done, to think more about this project Pitika has gifted us. On to you, Critic Joja.
Okay. I don't think my handling is going to be as lyrical as Professor Hlonipha has been, but my focus, what I've been thinking about, has been around just the question of the bones. So I've been trying to think about what do the bones do. I think when Ruzy was speaking earlier, she was speaking about the process of divination and how the exhibition itself attempts to instantiate this process of divination. So in my thinking, I've been trying to think about how these bones, but basically the practical and the symbolic utility of these bones has informed the spiritual and the aesthetic practices in pre-historic society. So I'll begin there just to give a sense, because as Thembinkosi had mentioned earlier, that bones were always used for a variety of things, including, as weapons and various communal contraptions. However, I've just discovered that there's a way in which paleontologists they've discovered this technology, of finding out or tracing what these fossils or whatever bones that are in the museum, like which animals they come from. And I found that quite interesting. But this is just at the level of thinking about the bones at the level of practicality. At the level of the symbolic, though, bones were used to mark status, power, strength, and whatever. In fact, I was thinking about this notion of this image of the bone as, or how rather bones have been used. There's a scene, one of the opening scenes in Dambudzo Marachera's Black Sunlight, when the protagonist talks about the Terran's throne being made out of human skulls as a way to induce fear in his subjects. Spiritually, bones and other animal residues have more presence and visibility in post-colonial Africa, even today. These could be human or animal bones. These bones could be bones of dead people, but also they could be bones of just corporal features of animals used for ritual sacrifice and spiritual healing. For instance, the bones thrown during divination by Inyanga are from the goat. It's usually, when somebody goes through the process of Ugutwasa or maybe to become Inyanga, the bones that they use to throw to divine are actually bones from that goat. And also depending on circumstances or on the nature of one's calling, these bones could come from, apparently from a tortoise as well, or even animals from the sea. And they are apparently usually small bones, which means bones that are usually like joint bones, so the small bones. And I mean, umsebenzi ka Livingstone Mngoti called the study of Ugutwasa does kind of indicate to the protracted and complex nature in which multiple resources are mobilized, and this includes bones in the process of divining, in the process of creating a new subject, a new being. But there are other instances. There's a funny song that I've just noted, a funny song by Matala Gunene in the album Gongoman. It's called Abangoma. And in this song, the song describes a divination quandary, in which the Itwasa is asked before that person graduates, they have to go and find an animal's tooth. So the singer keeps wailing, but where are we going to find an animal's tooth? So for me, there's an interesting way in which, you know, questions of animality or animal features, including bones, are so central to our prehistorical and even contemporary traditional practices. However, thinking about this at a level of art, the utility of the bone in aesthetic discourse and in cultural creative practices is as equally complex. Visual artist Ernest Mangoba, in his critique of formalism, always makes reference to the indigenous peoples of the Arctic regions who use bones not only for purposes of survival, but also for their cultural practices. For Mangoba, the materials are always contingent. I mean, this is an issue that he repeats consistently, that the materials don't always matter, right? Given the objective conditions of a particular sociality and the materials in which you adopt in a specific or particular place are then subjected to the ethical, moral, or even political positions of that society or that particular person. In this sense, this locates the imperative of art and the aesthetic in its capacity to find expressivity in the most unlikely and inopportune moments. And I mean, and Prof. Ntuli comes from this tradition that makes use of available material in which for purposes of particularly liberatory politics through art, right? And this, of course, I mean, as Thembinkosi and others had mentioned earlier, this has a very interesting trajectory in South African art. In fact, Matsimela Manaka describes Prof. Ntuli's sculptures as innovative, and I want to quote, it says, Pitika Ntuli uses whatever material is at hand. When he was in a death cell at Matsapa prison in Swaziland, he used soup and bread to pursue his creative drive. And there's also a very nice image that Prof. Ntuli sent to me of him making art out of sunlight. And of course, there's many other people, particularly in the Africanist tradition, who've made art out of in very difficult condition. And one of them is a very unknown person, particularly in the art tradition, is Jafta Masemola, who actually created a key through a sunlight soap in prison while in Robben Island, and imprinted that key, the master key, on the sunlight, and then created a key out of that imprint while he was working as a blacksmith in prison. Unfortunately, he didn't escape because one of his fellow comrades ratted on him. The use of bones forms part of in this specific exhibition, forms part of this trajectory of found objects. That is a tradition that makes use of everyday objects in order to reconfigure their quotidian life and use value. Pitika Ntuli's work takes seriously the materiality of objects that have been discarded and basically rendered lifeless. On one level, this recalibration of the discarded object or thing is an interesting metaphor for Black people as people whose humanity has been questioned, basically rendered dead while still alive. In the sense that there's also Biko's injunction that firstly, for Black people, death is not the horizon, right? Mm-hmm. Death can be immobilizing, a moment. but also Biko insists on the fact that even if Black people are kind of rendered socially dead, if you want to put it like that, Black consciousness, one needs to pump the shell, as he says, pump the shell. So this reinvigoration of the ruined object, for me, also relates very specifically to the existential situation of Black people. Death, be it physical or figurative, is not the horizon, I said, but rather the passageway. I mean, some people have raised this, the passageway to a different realm of being. It is therefore not a coincidence that cultural objects outlive us. As it were, Pitika Ntuli's bones are what we call these are bones of contention. You know, Pitika Ntuli's artworks now, I mean, at the level of the conceptual, the compositional, that undress the social edifice. Much like the use of scrap material, bare, engraved, embroidered, burnt, reconfigured, the materiality of the bone here has an affective and a tactile presence. They are silhouetted like composition, deceptively revelatory, three-dimensionality, and minimalistic aesthetic, pure bones, as it were, seem to pretend to the language of exposition, of candor, of truthfulness. Prof mentioned Tagijani earlier on, and that kind of made me happy because I see how Tagijani, who in Cape Town, the people of my generation will probably think of a figure called Skelemtot. So the work has these kind of pretensions of Tagijani, a very deceptive character. You think you've got him, he's gone. And so the point is that you do not necessarily, you can't necessarily confine these objects into a particular frame, you know, even if you can situate them in a tradition. But though these objects, as I said, are conceived out of animal cadavers, they are not necessarily mournful or even deathly. Though they seem to beckon us to return to the historically variegated uses of bones in prehistoric life or the divination rituals, they are not necessarily utilitarian and even prescriptive. Instead, what we find, I think, is a very idiosyncratic aesthetic personality that recalibrates life after death, so to speak, to the world of the. I mean, in a sense that as much as these are bones from, these are signs of a lifeless, you know, thing or animal or whatever, their subjection in by Pitika's hand give them, recalibrate their life and return them somehow into the world of the living to adjudicate, to make interventions about the ongoing situations of the country. Yeah. Done.
Wow. So can I say something?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, thank you, Athi, because you have brought up quite a number of very, very interesting issues of bones and the issues of the issues of death, the affective and the tactile, all coming together. And I just remember Jeff Masemula,
yeah,
as well as his bone.
Mm.
So the whole range of the stuff that you brought up, the issue of Mangoba, with whom I spent quite a hell of a lot of time with, and the issues that we have just been actually raising in here. are so powerful. They take us again straight back to a few things that Hlonipha has also spoke about, the anthropomorphic and the post-human, that we will come back, at least I think sometime later. But what Athi, you have said is that we have touched upon an issue. We as African people, Nguni people in particular, we have got totems.
Yeah.
Right? I am the master of the hyena. I am a mamba. I'm a mamba snake. So dealing actually with bones, I'm also there dealing part and parcel with who I am in another, in another world that really needs to be fully grasped and fully understood.
Yeah. Because I also wanted to touch on that as well, Pitika. It's funny because I was also going to bring up the fact that my totem is also in union. It's a bird, and I think that from what I've been hearing both from Hlonipha and yours talks, what you basically relaying about the exhibition and your feelings about it, everything has been related to the human experience of the bird, and that human experience is also related to not even the bone as being animal as well. So every single bone that you've seen, whether it's medium on fire, under the shadow of corruption, they all relate to some form of an animal. And I think that from what I've been hearing, I think that to a certain extent, because this topic is part of the aesthetics of Pitika Ntuli's bone sculptures, I just wanted to ask you a question, if I may, Thembinkosi. Can I ask Athi a question? I just wanted to ask you, what is it then do you see within the aesthetics, if you could simplify it for the audience? Because obviously you've touched on different things, and which were very incredible, as well as Hlonipha, who spoke about it more in terms of a lyrical sense, but you have gone into different concepts and even different moments within both past and present understandings. But for me, I want to understand, what is the aesthetic of Pitika Ntuli's bone sculptures when you think of them in terms of the animal?
You know, I was actually just listening to a very nice song by I just forget her name, from Freshly Ground. What's her name again?
Zolani.
Zolani, yeah.
Yes.
And, yes, and there was the sculpture of the woman with the long breasts, and I think I really liked that particular piece. And for me, at the level of the aesthetic, I mean, as I say, there's a certain sense of paleness, you know, a paleness in the bone that though pale has certain materiality. One encounters the actual bone, and one cannot think about the work except to also think simultaneously. I mean, because I mean, when Prof Ntuli was talking about the aesthetic usually means, you know, the science of beauty, as he says, or the science of sense, right? The science of sense. But also there is the question of the material, the tactile, the haptic, that seems unavoidable, right? Seems unavoidable when dealing with the sculpture. But also, my phone just keeps sliding and doing funny things. There's also the question of a very strange silhouette-like appearance of the bones, in the sense in which, just like, for example, you would think about people like Kara Walker and those people who do actual silhouettes, the bones tend to appear, to me at least, in this very silhouette-like sense. And by that I mean the silhouette as almost the bare minimum expression of the thing, the outline, but nevertheless the essence, the suggestion of the essence. So it is at the level of the aesthetic, not so much a thing that Thembinkosi spoke earlier about this vacillation between realist or figurative appearance and the abstract. So, and I'm saying this silhouette aspects of the sculpture, for me, exemplify the very idea of the bone. To go to the bone of the matter, it is to perhaps go to the basic minimum at the level of the aesthetic, the basic minimum. So I'm thinking about these sculptures at that level, to go to the object at its most, what's the word? At its barest, I think.
Okay, just for sake of time, thanks, Athi, thanks, Ruzy. Let's invite Thembeka Heidi to also take a shot with the ongoing conversation. To you, Thembeka.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you once again to Thembinkosi and Ruzy for organizing and inviting us. Babuntuli,
Yebo.
Togoza.
Thokoza.
So I wonder, I've got 3 questions, and I wonder if you'd like me to ask them all in one go, or should I ask one question and then wait for your response?
Since I'm a democracy, I will allow you to ask the 3.
Okay. All right. So just as a disclaimer, I'm very inexperienced in the world of like criticism and intellectuals and all of that. But I'm obsessed with this subject matter. Like, it is something that I feel myself and a lot of other millennials have kind of been robbed of because of maybe the ambitions or desires maybe of our parents to sort of urbanize and, you know, get us into Model C schools and things like that. So I've been robbed of it, but it's something that I really want to learn more about, and I'm hoping by asking these questions that I'm going to get a bit closer. So the first question, a lot of these questions also some other people have touched on, so I hope it's not a repetition, but okay. The first question is, you've spoken about the time when you were in detention and you'd use, so you'd sculpt things with your fingernail, or you sculpt soap, the soap that they gave you, or the bread that you'd squeeze it into a certain object. I'm interested in the transience of these kind of works, right? The fact that you made these works out of nothing, and these are not works that are necessarily going to go on a gallery wall, and they're not necessarily going to last. Okay, and I see this kind of thing of making things out of nothing in the general context of African culture, but also just Black people. We were speaking about jazz earlier. Jazz is an instance again of Black people basically taking the raw cards that they've been given and making magic out of that. Okay, and I think of you know, even the huts, like soil huts, that people use sand to make homes to live in, you know, and reed to make roofs, you know, and even in Jondolo, like that is also an instance of people taking something that is deemed as useless and making it an actual culture. And I'm thinking even back into my childhood, where we would use sweet wrappers and we'd make these patterns and use them as jewelry, right? This is a kind of an art or a skill or a craft that nobody really taught us, but we knew to take that sweet wrapper and make it into something. There was something present. There was no class about that, but it's just like a movement globally of Black people in many different time frames making things. Even these young boys that make wire cars, you know, like you can't go to Toys R Us, but you can find wire and make yourself, you know, immortal. And that became like a South African thing, right? So I'm really interested in that, and how even when we look at ubungoma, right, throwing bones, like you find people do use bones, but people also use like bottle caps, people use coins, people use dice, people use all sorts of found objects in order to use these so-called bones to divine. And again, divination is the definition of kind of making something out of nothing. What in the Western context is nothing, but to the African diviner is a connection, a telephone line to those that came before us, right? But even within this context, when you throw these bones, okay, these objects that used to be something else and are now this telephone line to our people, even in using them, there's still even a fluidity in that technology, so that when you throw the bones, they will never necessarily land in the same place when you throw them for one person or the next person, or one purpose and another purpose. That in itself is the power of throwing bones, right? The fact that it will decipher itself, and not only will it fall in different places, but it will also be read in different ways, depending on who is reading Lao Matambo and who's receiving that reading. You know, so I think in the whole, what I'm talking about right now is my attraction to this whole idea of fluidity and transience, and something like, if we were to, somebody spoke earlier about translation, and I'm thinking, if we were to translate it, firstly, who will we be translating it to and for? And in translating it, are we not then solidifying it and losing something within that? Because it seems as though the power is in the transience, in the fluidity. And so fluidity is kind of the theme of all of my questions. But my first question is then, I'm curious in terms of the sculptures and the work in this exhibition, and in fact your work in general. There's a certain permeance to these works, okay? And sculpture in general, I think in the fine art context, is actually meant for longevity. It's kind of, in terms of the permeance of art, sculpture wins that game, right? And so when I look at these sculptures and I think of ukulahla matambo, bula, divination, it's kind of that thing where that fingerprint is in the instance, in who's throwing the bones, who's reading, who's receiving the message. So la matambo esiwabonayo manje amile, right? You've deciphered them in your way, and I guess we can read them how we want to read them when we approach them. But I'm interested how you would articulate somebody who might see a tension there, a tension between, maybe you're not even drawing on this culture, but I see that connection when I listen to you talk about your work. And so I'm curious if you have any thoughts or words about how someone might look at these as sort of, permanent, and how that might relate to the fluidity of the culture that it sits within. That's my first question. That was my first question. So should I just carry on to the next one? Okay, so as I said, my research is in the fluidity that, people like myself, I don't really want to embarrass millennials, but I'm considering myself as a millennial in the way that I approach this work. So I'm looking for something that relates to me as a person who's living in this era, who's basically attached to my smartphone and basically got access to ubungoma through the internet, because my parents didn't teach me that, So for me, my identity, it's not only, even as an artist, it's not only interdisciplinary, but it's also intersectional. you know, and it holds so many things which might in the Western school of thought seem like binaries, you know, but those binaries, that's why I feel at home with this subject matter, because binaries don't necessarily exist, right? So when I think about the way that you've been talking about ukubhula, but you also mention about the problems of the world and how this exhibition is actually meant to contribute to trying to solve those problems. So, and then I see a tension between how ukubhula is to divine, right? And I even heard Athi speak about this earlier, where he was mentioning inyanga. So I'm interested there in the, I guess, flowing between the binaries of isangoma esibhulayo nenyanga elaphayo, right? And I wonder, do you see yourself as both of these? Do you see this work as both divining and healing, or aiming to heal? Or have you chosen one of these binaries? And also in this title, Azibuyele Emasisweni, again, as a millennial, there's something slightly off-putting to me about that, because it presents African culture as historic, as something we need to go back to. So I'm interested again in how the future, in order to like make it enticing for people like myself, who we're actually, I'm irritated by this notion that in order to be an African, I have to go backwards. You know, I'm more interested in the idea of the history of it. Like myself as a Model C, coconut and whatever, I feel as if abantu bagithi, abantu baphansi, they're with me, regardless of have I read that book or have I gone backwards or whatever. They found a way into me, right? And I would like to move forward, and I'm interested again, what do you think of that binary, of this notion that when you think of African, you always think of backwards? And is there an option for us to kind of get rid of that binary and actually think of what you said earlier about the cyclicality of African culture? I'm so much more interested in that, you know, of the backwards and forwards being part of one movement, you know, rather than highlighting the backwards. Okay, and then lastly,
can we allow Pitika to respond to those two? I think that is mouthful, because we're going to lose some of the details, and then you follow up. I think I just, yeah. Thanks, Pitika.
Yeah. Let me go straight back to the last thing that we actually said, is that as African people, we are compelled to look backwards, you know, because whatever we had was actually taken and was actually stolen, you know, from us. Now, the example that I actually use is when you look at the Italian, you know, Renaissance. When Lorenzo di Medici, the banker who knew what money is, unlike those that I know in my country and somewhere else, put them aside, and let's think about them, got a group of poets, writers, artists, and so on, and said, let's go back and study the Greco-Roman classics of what happened actually behind. Why was Greece so powerful? Why was Rome so powerful? Why are we so weak in ourselves? That was the starting point of the Renaissance. That's why you produce the Raphaels, the Leonardo da Vinci's, the Michelangelos, you know, on it, because there were people who had a vision. They had the money and they had the vision, you know, to say, let's go back in order to, so, because going back is not going back to go and stay. It's going back to go and fetch that which we have left behind. The Western world, when it came up with postmodernism, actually in the arts, was because those artists had realized that they missed certain spiritual things along the way. Therefore, by studying the other, which is actually us, then they will be able to find an answer to the prevailing problems, you know, that were confronting them. Now, to answer the other question about detention and the viability of the works that had been made, because one, I made sculptures out of my soap, so that when I was dirty, I washed with my art. And I made art with my bread, so that when I was hungry, I ended up eating my art. I made art with a toilet paper. You put it into the water. When it is soft, you make little statues or even chess pieces with you. When you have to go to the loo, you use actually you lose your art. That they don't actually last is not anything surprising. I'll take you on a very quick thing. Think of Esther Mahlangu, for instance, and the Ndebele women. I come also from that culture. And when I was 10 years old or 11, the American tourists came and they were looking at the work that my mother and the other people were doing. They said, can you ask these women, what colors do they use? And my aunt said, tell them we use 8 colors. The American said, oh, these people are so stupid. Why can't they use enamel paint? Because enamel paint will last forever. Because 8 colors, when the rain comes, it washes them away. My aunt was so angry. He said, tell this fat white man that I'm so sick and tired of white people wanting to create little forevers when we want to demonstrate that we can forever create.
Yes.
Whenever they have been washed out, and then we are going to point to different designs. That is the nature of what affected me when I was in there, that I cannot not be an artist. I have to use whatever I have in me. When we speak about the wire things, the plastics that our people have been actually using, recycling everything around, that is stultifying actually the earth, those are the things that I'm saying that let's go back to the past, to look at our creativity, use our creativity in order to create either businesses, ideas, education, for our people. So in other words, then, when you talk now fluidity, that's how African cultures are. We are a very fluid people. That's what Hlonipha has actually told us. You can't talk jazz without talking fluidity. You can't talk jazz without talking improvisation, creativity, something that is new. Whether it's Africans that were stolen long ago or whether they're in here, certain things run through all of us. We are a creative a people who listen to our hearts and only use our brains to regulate what we feel.
Can I just ask one more thing on that note, which I forgot to mention? I'm interested in this thing of uktwebula, right? And as it relates specifically to photography, and how I saw this text that Kollega Shange wrote, and it was about okay, anyways, this idea of uktwebula is basically when people take photographs, they take away the power from the subject, and that's known as uktagata, right? So umtagati utwebula by solidifying an image, by capturing an image. So this was part of this question of you having made art which would never necessarily last. Versus, I'm trying not to use versus because I don't want there to be a binary, but I'm just kind of trying to think where your mind is within that process, whether you separate these works, whether you see them as having different powers, and whether or not you see the works as losing a certain power by the permeance.
You see, what happens is that the work that I made out of my bone, out of my soap, and out of my toilet paper, and out of my bread, are part and parcel of who I am as an artist. That I cannot live without actually being creative, without creating something out of nothing. That is my African heritage. we'll use cow dung, we'll use practically everything that we want to do in order to create beauty. So in other words, to us, aesthetics, it's not just a theoretical issue that you put actually into your head. It is a lived experience. It is a challenge, to those people who have separated themselves completely. Because the problem, what we have here, Heidi, is that we have Newtonian physics, the physics of binary opposites.
Yeah.
Good, bad, white, what?
Yeah.
Privileging the head over the emotions and the spirit and these things. That's why you've got your head office, your head lights, your head mistress, your head teacher, your head boy, your head, everything is reduced actually to the head rather than things that go over into the heart, where pulse, emotion, feeling are central. So I'm saying that as African people, we believe that the spiritual material, the rational material, all of these things coexist, actually in us. That's why when we are in the worst possible place, like I was in the death cells in a foreign country with no one to look, after me, the only thing I had to do was to sit down and to make art. When I went into exile, all I had to do was to sit down and to make art in order to maintain that sense of my African, my Africanness that we need to do, just like what the Medicis have done and anybody has done. Go back. I'm young people, like you, to begin to reconceptualize a new art history, a new aesthetics, a new anthropomorphic art, because we were colonized because of our anthropomorphism. Because when we looked at animals, we knew that consciousness, that brains, and then they said we are animists. Isn't it? When we looked at our sculptures and loved them, they said you are idolaters, you are worshipping these things. And yet, when you watch the statue of the Virgin Mary, you are not an idolater, you are seeking spirit in order to reach God. So when I'm saying back to who we are, is that we should be Africans unapologetically in our work. Other than that, what else can I give you as an 80-year-old guy to leave you to take on, except to follow on the footsteps of being really an African and unapologetic about it?
Okay, last question before Thembinkosi cuts me off. I'm going to read this one because I feel like I miss some things when I kind of go from the head. Okay.
I think I'm just thinking time. You'll ask your question also. Pitika is going to respond. But what I want to propose, I'm just looking at time, and of course, time is always against us. So what I'll propose,
because please let us just ask. Look at how
I'll make it quick. I'll
real
go super quick.
what I'm trying to say, while I'm saying, no, she's going to ask a question. I'm going to respond, but also I want the panelists to begin to think of rapping commentary, because we are moving towards that. I just want to say, while Thembeka is going to ask that question, we are going to respond to, can we also, as panelists, begin to think of rapping comments and also pick up on some of the questions that have been posed. That's all I wanted to say, so that at least people can process their ideas.
Humble apologies, young man.
No, thanks, Pitika. No, you still have all your time, Thembeka, to ask your question and Pitika to respond. I just wanted to also make the panelists to begin to think of closing remarks and so forth.
Okay, so the centrality of bones in African spirituality defies the differentiation between the animate and the inanimate, between the body and the spirit. And bones in particular allow themselves to be interpreted, okay? So death, it's not demonized, as Athi said, in African culture. And people who've experienced death reveal themselves in the bones. So actually death is like kind of a positive thing in our culture, right? It gives us those powers to communicate with those people that have experienced death. And in I Write What I Like, Biko holds that the oppressor's Achilles is that the African does not fear death, okay? So in this time of Corona, when, I mean, I've been looking, the viral videos of people singing Corona, yo, yo, Corona, yo, yo. And, you know, gom songs and amapiano songs are coming with Corona, Babes Wodumo. One of her lyrics was, "Kuthiwa umuntu omnyama ayimthinti ledo," you know, stuff like that coming out from people right now, showing that regardless of the numbers, regardless of what's happening, people are just not afraid. People are just like umangie lokshini. I see kids, I see grandmas, people are just living like nothing has happened, right? So it's almost like even with this, the vaccines and, you know, the COVID-19 awareness and whatever, it's almost like it's not for us, you know, it's for people who are afraid to die, which clearly we're not, you know. So if we go back to the bones, okay, and you said just now, sorry, you said you attributed praise songs for each sculpture in order to divine the future state of the nation. And that instantly reminded me of all the songs, not only the songs that came, you know, struggle songs, doi songs, like we are a nation of people that, you know, goes through whatever we're going through creating, and in particular, when it comes to the communal songs, right? And in thinking of these songs that people are literally, everybody knows that chant, Corona, yo, yo. It's become like a national anthem for what is actually a global disaster, right? So considering that we're not afraid of death, considering the symbolism of death in your exhibition, and also the moment, the zeitgeist of death right now, what are the bones saying to you, specifically to us, not to WHO and, you know, the general opinion of what COVID is? What are the bones saying to us, the people that aren't afraid to die, the people that are actually empowered by death, right? The people that are probably going to do more to fix this earth after death, you know. So what do these bones say specifically to us?
Yeah, I think I should go back very quickly to Athi.
Pitika, before you answer that, there's also a question from the comments from the chat, which speaks to Thembeka's question. You know, I mean, it asks, for example, that for you, you know, I mean, what can we learn explicitly from this moment? You know, when we think about these concepts, you know, I mean, but when we also think about these bones, what it is that we should learn from this exhibition. I'm just trying to extend Thembeka's question is, what are the bones telling you about this moment we are experiencing, we are going through? You know, I mean, I just wanted to bring that question so that we can answer, you know, also as well.
Okay, thank you, Chikwa. I said I was going to go back to Athi because Athi is the one who brought up the issue of death. You cannot talk about death without talking about ancestors, right? And right now, the issue of ancestors is very primary because we are confronted with a pandemic that is going to kill us in order to take us to go and meet, our ancestors. So, in other words, I mean, for me, when I look at and I think of the bones that I've actually unleashed and getting everybody to be involved in it, the Spongile Kumalos, the Florence Maseves, the Napo Machianes, name all of those, you know, people who have got that kind of a vibrancy, who also love their own ancestors, who also, you know, love their own their lives. So by getting them involved, I'm 8 years old, and that's it. But those people that are collaborating are still going to continue what we have actually started around now, to find Africa's soul, find who we really are, live our life, be creative as we are, teach, lecture, you know, from a perspective of you know, who we are, unapologetically.
Thank you, Bamtuli. Of course.
An unexpected ending, Pitika. Thank you. I think, you know, I mean, we're almost there. We still have about 15, 20 minutes to kill. So I would like to go back to Ruzy. There was a question, Ruzy, that was posed, and I would like you to respond to it. You know, I mean, this pertains to the curating. I'll read the question. It says, what did you find most difficult to curate and articulate within this exhibition? Bringing divination and a contemporary feel together can be tricky because you don't want to dilute either one. So what is your response to that? But also to pick up on other issues that have come, you know, from this conversation, from Athi, from Hlonipha, from Thembeka. So as a way of driving the conversation towards conclusion.
So, what I found the most difficult was the language in which we speak about these bones, because right now we keep going back and forth and even struggling as to how to articulate these bones within a language that is of Africa, that relates to our own African identity and our African experience. And Heidi even goes further by talking about the fact that even with me as well, with Pitika, we come from different generations, and yet we still struggle to articulate what it is without making it binary, you know. And I think that even though there will always be that thing of white, black, gray, whatever, but within those there's a middle part that exists. And I think that that gray area is what we are articulating in this exhibition, that gray area of discovery, that gray area of the unfinished canvas. And that's what these bones are. They are unfinished. And why I'm saying they're unfinished is that these bones, we existed before even the collaborations even came. And even when Athi spoke about his experience of Zolani's poem and her song, it was in relation to the long-breasted women. That was an experience he had with Zolani's response to what Pitika had already done. And that in itself stood in relationship to the artwork. So these artworks are continuously developing, and it will be a very different conversation. And even the language that we'll be speaking about will be very different if these bones were bronze and they were casted within bronze, because bronze adds a finality to it. But bones, and when we speak about these bones, and we are able to conjure up different feelings, different emotions. And that's why a lot of people, when they experienced this exhibition, which I felt could never have been achieved without COVID and the stillness with which COVID brought with and this angel of death, it reminded us of the fact that there isn't one way of articulating one thing or one concept. There are multiple ways. And that came up through collaboration with African thought leaders, African poets, African singers, everyone, and even young and old. There are different. There's this one collaboration that happened with Buti's sculpture, and he went further than what we even anticipated he would go, and collaborated and even got his daughter to help compose Mantati, to help him with composing what it is that he wanted to say in relationship to the sculpture. So what I found difficult was releasing what it actually means to curate an exhibition, and understanding that things are always unfinished. There's no finality. But what I'll adding to that is that I've also grown up in a society where obviously I've been educated in a specific way. I studied art at WITS, and I studied curating at UCT. And even those moments of understanding that, okay, the language with which UCT articulates is very different to how WITS articulates. Even if they are institutions, they still articulate art in different ways. But curating again, going to platforming, etc., it's hard because no one actually talks about Africa as becoming, as always in the state of back and forth, because we are scared of going back, because we are scared of aligning ourselves to what we have been defined for a long time. And what this exhibition has even taught me is that we cannot be bound to one understanding of ourselves. We have to be able to cultivate the multiplicity within ourselves and not be fearful of what that can bring. And that's why I was not fearful of the fact that I was curating these bone sculptures that archivally have got their own loaded meanings and representations and how people understand bones in Africa. But I approached it within that narrative of understanding that I am an African being and I am a spiritual being. So why can I not articulate that which I am? And I think that we cannot be fearful of that which we are. And I think that even though it's tricky, we cannot dilute ourselves. And by diluting ourselves, we dilute ourselves through language. That's why I even found that I had to even go to different sangomas, different artists, different people to actually understand what it is that I want to say with regards to this exhibition. So this exhibition just reminded me that collaboration is more important than the I. And that's what we did. So yeah.
Thank you, Ruzy. Athi, would you like to pick on that? Because I think the question of language, even in the question and Q&A section, it keeps on coming. This the importance of the importance of language. I'm asking this for you to think about you, because you are a critic. You use language. You read images. You penetrate some of the surfaces that some of us don't have the capacity or the facility that you have as a critique. So what would be your view, about the question of language? That would be one thing I would like to touch on, but also to speak about language in relation to the question of aesthetics, because Funzo have posted a very interesting quote from the late great S.K. Mphahlala, which I'll read so that you can think with this quote. It reads as follows: "And aesthetics begins with the very dust you kick around, the shit you smell, the houses you look at that make your environment and that you live in, the quality of life around you," unquote. And we've discussed the question of aesthetic as not something separate. It's part of the everyday experience. It's not that which we look at. It's not that which is reduced to this notion of we go to the gallery. We aesthetically, I wake up, I take a bath, I make myself up, I dress in a particular way, I eat in a particular way, I fashion myself in various ways, right? So it's something that is part of the everyday. So it's not only that which reside within these objects. Can you speak also about the question of language and also aesthetic as part of the everyday? Lastly, I would like you to touch on is, another thing that keeps on coming, the idea, the notion of memory, which I would like also Hlonipha to think as artist speaks about this idea of memory and history. And that becomes important because one of the challenges and the penalty that we've been suffering from is this experience of orality when it comes to African experience and histories, that most of our knowledge resides in storytelling. And some of our elders are dying with this because if it cannot be translated from mother, grandmother to child, these stories are not written down. So language is not only spoken as such, but also it's in a form of speaking. So can you speak on those three aspects, Athi, the question of language, the question of aesthetics, as well as history, memory, vis-a-vis like orality?
I don't think it's possible to speak about those two things for 5 minutes. You can't. That's a very ungenerous demand. In the sense that, one could just say that the post-1994 political and cultural space has proposed to the South African polity a certain kind of language. And I always want to go back to Pitika's very interesting discussion with Alpisex. South Africa, after 94, a very prescriptive language was imposed on what artists should do. That is, and by language I mean the thinning down particularly of the political aspects and political responsibility of the artist, and therefore also the ethical imperative and interventions of the artist. So the question of language, just to summarize, the question of language, similarly to the question of the aesthetic, is then predicated on this Rainbow Nation Kumbaya discourse that treats the everyday, or rather encourages a certain apolitical interpretation of the everyday or exposition of the everyday. Because I mean, there's a text by Louis Ngosi just specifically on how the post-1994 discourse has switched from his own criticism of South Africa, hyperactive, what do you call it, utilization of political propaganda as art. But he then comes back after 94 to say, even if I had made this criticism, I did not say that we must transition from the spectacle of extra political activity into the spectacle of this fetishism of an apolitical everyday. You see what I'm saying? So I'm just saying, the question of language and how we speak about art generally now is overdetermined by the shying away from real political questions. So the question of divination, as opposed that now we're discussing, is one of the key elements in artistic writing, in artistic practice, that is lacking. What we think about divination now, people often think, oh, you have to go to a gallery and slaughter a goat, and this you are revealing things when you do that, whereas you keep quiet about the most essential things that are going on in the country.
Thanks, Athi. I can see you're smiling, Pitika. We are coming to you. But let's hear.
No. I'm liking what Athi is saying. I would have liked to have said it like that.
No, thanks. Let's hear what Hlonipha, can you help us to think about this? Because it's coming out of the comments and questions, the question of memory. Also, I think Thembeka also has raised an important question. I'd like also to help us think that for them as the millennials, they don't want to be bogged down by this return to Mangene. They don't want to be bogged down to go back to Tio Soka. They don't want to be bogged down to learn about Jabavu Noni. They don't want to Charlotte Matleka, Nonsizi, and then. So this history, as a historian, why history is important, why memory, factors, centrally to this kind of discussions. And of course, you can also pick up on the question of language as well, because earlier you did, when you were unpacking partially the question of the title of the exhibition.
Yeah, I'm going to put it all together into this concept of the past. That I think part of the problem here is the fact that we think about the past as a destination or a noun, but actually the past is a verb. It is an active, it's a doing word. And again, I'm going to use the jazz metaphor. It's like a jazz soloist, a soloist in jazz. The jazz musicians continue to play in the background in order to remind the soloist that even though he or she has taken the center stage, the background music is the past. It reminds you with what is the melody, what is the song that you are actually playing. So no matter how brilliant as a soloist you are, you can, John Coltrane would play a solo for 10 minutes. And you would think, okay, now he's taking over the whole song. And then at some point he has to stop. He has to be humble enough to acknowledge that he's still part of a band, that he is not on his own. And this is what the past is. This is how to think of the past as active, of memory as active, as this background music that is playing in the background and propelling you forward, because this is what rhythm also is. You know, if you think about Leopold Senghor's definition of what he called Negro aesthetics, rhythm is something that propels you forward. It doesn't pull you backwards, propels you forward because it tells you which notes you should think about in the future. This is the whole point of a jazz solo. It's not that you are telling the other musicians that you are better than them. It's that you are allowing yourself to be propelled forward by the melody. But as I say, the song is finite. You have to be humble enough to know that even your own future, which you've been anticipating, this future which you are rushing towards, that future is also going to come to an end in exactly the same way that the past has come to an end. You are also going to be the past at some point. And I think this is the whole problem, is that people think that the future is open-ended, whereas in fact the future is quite finite. It also comes to an end at some point, right? So if you think about how people used to imagine what the 2000s were going to be looking like, people thought we were going to be flying, that we were going to have flying cars, and we were going to have, they created a whole future, which has not happened. That future was terminated a long time ago. That technology never happened. So that's the first point. As I say, is to think about this idea of memory and the past as being a verb rather than being a noun. It's not a thing, it's an action. It's an action that is continuously propelling us forward. The past is the future because it allows us to live in the future. It's like, as I say, the solo musician, they cannot play if the other musicians are not playing in the background. The other part of it is, I think the fact that our ancestors used to practice this funerary practice of being buried with their items should also remind us that our ancestors were saying, I don't want to determine the future. I don't want to put a limit. I don't want you to keep copying what I do. So our ancestors did not burden us with the past. We have burdened ourselves with the past. We have decided to interpret the past in a particular way. So, I mean, that famous Mapungubwe rhinoceros is a funerary object. It was buried with the person. The person didn't want you to see it. That's why they got buried with it. But we dug it up, and now we are imposing it on ourselves, and then we are blaming the past. We say, well, why does the past keep coming back? It's because you went looking for it. You went and dug it up. So I think we need to be humble to recognize the fact that our ancestors actually did not impose the past on us. We have imposed the past on ourselves. So I'll give you a final example from Make Mafuze. Make Mafuze actually wrote a whole series of articles titled Izangoma. And when I was doing my dissertation, this is where my supervisor said to me, I think you better stop, because this is a whole area in which you're going to start a debate which you are not going to be able to finish. So there's a whole unfinished story about Make Mafuze and his understanding of divination. And this was somebody writing in the 1920s. So again, all these people who are now claiming that they are rediscovering divination, Make Mafuze in the 1920s was already thinking about what divination means. And one of the sentences that he came up with was, in all animals, in the animal kingdom, there is divination. So he starts off by giving examples of animals that have got divinatory powers. He doesn't even start with humans, he starts with animals. So that was one of the most interesting things. So for me, those are the things that define the past. We have a choice about how to think about the past. But as I say, as with the jazz soloist, you cannot play on stage on your own. You cannot be a one-horse trick and think that you're going to live in the future, precisely because you're simply going to lose that rhythm that the other musicians are trying to give you in the background. That's what our ancestors are doing for us. They are giving us the rhythm that should propel us into the future. That is what the future is. It's a song. It is not a solo. So that's where I'm going to end.
So Thembinkosi, just one quick one. I think I have to put a rejoinder here, because I think Hlonipha has really put it up that the past, we are not just going to the past for the sake of the past, right? Yes. We are going to the past for something, because when Hlonipha and Thembeka live here, they'll go to a disco. And when they get into a disco where they're African people, they are going to end up in a circle. And once they're in a circle, one person is going to dance up there in the middle, and then somebody is going to get them all out, because it's just all of saying that the past, the present, the future are all contained right into that exercise.
Baba, just to let you know, we no longer call it the disco. Just letting you know.
What do you call it now? Please educate me.
The club.
Club.
Finished.
Wait, don't interfere with me. I'm going back to my own past. Whatever you tell me.
Thank you. That Thembeka, you've joined in. I'd like what's also your work, Thembeka, deals with these issues of spirituality and the kind of. Pardon?
I was just agreeing with you. Sorry.
Yeah. Your work deals with issues of spirituality, experiences of healing. You know, I mean, even the kind of beautiful activities that you've done at Rhodes. You know, I mean, in terms of the self-care, the taking care of the self. You know, I mean, can you, in also concluding, speak about your relation to Pitika's work, having looked at it, having thought about it in terms of spirituality, but also the idea of care, of self-care, when it comes to Black bodies, to African bodies, to women's bodies, to queer bodies, to intersectional bodies. How do we begin? Because these bones, as Hlonipha put it quite correctly, using the Miles Davis metaphor, that they're not, we can't see gender. Even when, for example, the one that now we are looking at it, we can only attribute certain features to it that we come already, you know, informed to say, oh, because of the intrigue of the beats, maybe she's a woman, right? So, you know, I mean, and Judith Butler have argued that sex is a construction. It's something that we are produced. It's produced. We are subjected to perform. So, in other words, this construct. So, I'm interested now to hear from you, from your own experience as a painter, you know, I mean, and someone who's done this project on healing and taking care of the self. How would you think healing and self-care in relation to these bones, the divination, you know, I mean, and so forth and so forth?
Yes, I can try. So I think for me, this whole discussion starts with the notion of multiplicity, and how I think, you know, having grown up the way I did, I really saw the world in a completely different way, and to be quite blunt, in a white way. So I really saw myself only as Heidi. I saw myself as this painter who went to art school, didn't even notice that there was hardly Black kids there, you know, and all of that actually as a compound inflicted a lot of damage and violence onto me without me even recognizing that violence, because being raised by white people, I didn't even understand that that could be a bad thing, you know. So it only started to dawn on me when I actually ended up with like some mental health issues and even had to drop out of art school because of these things. And then these were diagnosed as bipolar or multiple personality disorder or borderline personality. And then later on, when I started, this is actually when I left South Africa and I was like living abroad, and I started to actually re-look at some of those things, some of the way that I grew up, and even the diagnoses, even art school, all of those things. And I started to dream, and I dreamt I was my grandfather. And I realized at that moment, you know, all these things like multiple personality disorder, it's not that, you know, like I'm working with my people, like it's not a disorder, it's a power, you know. And even these things of, you know, gender dysmorphia, body dysmorphia, which is like, it's such a huge thing with millennials, you know, like we are a non-binary generation, and that is actually playing so much into the way that we perceive the world. And again, if I look at it like umkhulu putane is within me, then I'm not gay, I'm not non-binary, I'm just walking with these people, you know, these spirits, you know, that make me genderless, you know, that make my illnesses in this world, that make me incapable of sort of surviving in this system, are the same things that are actually going to heal me if I look at them in a different way. If I look at them not with the language and vocabulary of the colonizer, but with the language and vocabulary that exists, that walks with me, you know. And all I needed to do was actually just to become aware of it, and also understand that nobody has to teach me this. This is a problem that I have with Ubungoma, right? It's become a business as well. And it's become so standardized that, okay, umupupa, uyahamba uyotwasa, and you know, like all of that again is adopting the language of the colonizer, right? We're saying it's a school, this is how you educate, this is how much money you pay. And I've learned actually through this journey that it's me actually learning, looking at the even Ubungoma itself, and seeing how that is languaged in the colonizer's words, you know, and just trying to dig from intuition. You speak about self-care things that I do here at Rhodes, and it's intuition that leads me there. You know, most of the things are, I see Sisonke is part of the audience here, and he's a person that, or they are a person that wanted to do a sacrifice, a chicken sacrifice here on campus, and they weren't allowed. You know, they were blocked by the university, and the whole event was demonized. But even in that process of us proposing to do such a thing, we were healed. You know, we couldn't have known that that is how we were going to heal, but it's in the moving forward, in the looking and understanding what our languages are, and understanding that we're not one. Like, we are one as, you know, a community, but we're not one. We are a community, you know, looking beyond the self. I say self-care things, but I mean self-care as in when anabantu bagini, that's the self. You know, when anumpagati wako, that's the self. You know, so for me, that's the key, is learning and understanding that you are not firstly alone, you know, and also understanding that the colonizer, the West and whatever, it is so deep, you know, that the self itself is kind of a compound of things that are not necessary, that don't necessarily belong to us. You know, so without using that term that I don't like, going back, you know, I would say not even going forward, but just like remaining, like marinating in this idea that whatever we know, we don't really know. And the only thing that exists is what's around us, you know, the people that are with us, that have gone before us, that will come after us, you know, just like sitting in that. That's what self-care is about, just like communally sitting and trying to figure out how to heal, and that itself just becomes healing.
Thank you, Thembeka. Thank you. Beautiful. Pitika, we are almost there. We are almost there. The night is.
Yeah. So I'll be very brief.
Before you come, Pitika, I just want to preface your comments. One of the first comments on our Q&A, I want to read. There's something I think it's important to touch on. I'll read it. L. Gandhi says, I see many features here depict the ear. Gandhi is referring to the sculptures, which is an important symbol of peace, of listening to others, crossing the bridges. Is this something that you want to communicate when you say pregnancies of the mind? Not an empty mind, but a mind, an ear that is listening and analyzing. I'm raising this because there's what seems to be coming across, this idea of communication, whether language, this idea of communal. Ruzy speak about it strongly, the collaboration, and in fact, that's what this project as a testimony to collaboration, to community, of difference, of similarities, of overlaps, and all of that. So to do that, there are requirements such as listening to each other, hearing each other, understanding each other, even if we differ, even if we take different positions. So what I would like to do as you wrap, Pitika, just to respond to this comment, because I did mention earlier also, because I find your titles, pregnancies of the mind, or pregnant possibilities, as I use the word, these are loaded, meaning that there's so much one can say there. And also the idea of pregnancies of the mind might be also attached to what Joja brought in terms of Biko's idea of to pump the shell, that empty shell that needs feeding. That's what Black consciousness is about. So can we read this sculpture, or should we read this sculpture as also an act or a site whereby, we are beginning to think of feeding us, of it's like a fountain, it's like a chachalaze, right? Is that stage, is that platform, to use Ruzy, the platforming of ideas. So in other words, as you are wrapping up again, I would like you to say what it is this exhibition offers, and what should we take from this exhibition, from you as an artist, from you as a poet, from you as an activist, and so forth and so forth. This is not the last word, it's just for Pitika to take us towards that kind of conclusion.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that what I've witnessed, today, actually this evening, is the act of giving birth to ideas. Hence, the issue of the pregnancies of the mind. Listening to what Hlonipha has to say, going through the whole of the issues of improvisation, the issues of jazz, the issues of the past, and listening to Thembeka speaking about that she is not alone, she is traveling with other people. She's not just an individual, because we are all kind of pregnant, with ideas. Put it this way: if I'm doing this thing, is it Joja? That means I'm doing it the Joja way. Or is Goniwe? I'm doing it the Goniwe way, isn't it? When I'm doing it, is Ntu? What is this Ntu that we're actually referring to? The Ntu stem is a vital force, the power to cause things to happen and to change. And if you put in mu in front of that Ntu, you get what Muntu. And Umuntu is a change agent, the one who has got the power to cause things to happen. Hence, when we talk about pregnancies, giving birth to ideas, giving birth to anger, giving birth to joy, giving birth to a variety of all of these things that we human beings are actually prone to. But as Africans, is that when a child is born, you don't cut the umbilical cord. You leave the umbilical cord until it drops. Where it drops, you plant a tree. And once you plant a tree, we are linking that child to the world of plants. And then that child becomes Sombisi, the master of the hyena, picks up the totem. So the interrelationship, the interdependency of all of these things that you can find only in quantum mechanics is what you find in indigenous African knowledge, in African knowledge in the systems. And then also, when I ask you, what is time in your language? You will say isikati. What is space in your language? Umkati. Umkati and iskati are indivisible. So there can be no space and time in African thought, but the space-time continuum exists actually in it. So there's more commonalities in quantum mechanics to indigenous African knowledge systems. When we say go back actually to the beginning, to Emasisweni, we have got to begin to reread our own science from Bacon right through to Newton, to Van Heisenberg, the principles of indecipherability, wave particle dualities, all of these quantum ideas, ideas that you are going to find articulated neatly and clearly when we start speaking in our own languages. And the issue of the environment, that I must be friend to the animals, so all things with the environment, that interconnectedness, interdependence, interrelationship, links with the environment. Hence, therefore, the bones, as they are, that do not want to get rotten, 3.5 million years misplaced in the cradle of humankind, will tell us that the bones really existed. They are a whole, they are the holistic way of us approaching our doom, our life, our re-emergence or reincarnation, whatever word you want to use. You people are so good in English.
Yeah, I'm cool. Yes, I want to say Lenny's card. In Xhosa sithi ixesha. But of course, you know, good is card because we time, right? Asitsho Georgia. Hey, the time. So ixesha usisikhathi Pitika, man. So that's the beauty of how language also works in these multiple ways, especially when we appropriate it and do it what we like about it. Yeah. Having said that, I just want to thank again the panelists. Thank you, Pitika, for making this possible for us. If it was not for this exhibition, in particular this bone, surely we'll be doing a different conversation. Thank you for that gift. Also, I want to thank Hlonipha for making time to share us thoughts here. I want to thank Thembeka. I want to thank Athi. And of course, I want to thank the curator of the exhibition, and also, you know, I mean, to repeat what I've said earlier, to just send my thanks to Melrose Gallery for making this possible. And in particular, for those people who are behind, Kumi, you know, I mean, who's been doing all the technical work, setting up, and of course, Craig, Mark as well as Clint and others. And I would like to give the last word to the curator, because it is the curator that orchestrates these things. Me, I'm just like what I call it, an MC here. So I would like to give the last word to Ruzy Rusike, because this is a gig. The exhibition is a gig. And with that, we can bid farewells, yeah. Unless there are also other interventions. We do have 1 minute. But
oh yeah, just within that 1 minute, 10 seconds. So thank you very much, Thembinkosi, for giving us all the time and thinking so clearly, and to all the panelists that are there. It is absolutely your pleasure to be with me. Oh, I'm sorry. English is my 8th language, so I'm wrong. It is my pleasure to be with you.
But on that note, Pitika, I also wanted, I'm Thembinkosi, starting with you. This is definitely not my gig. But like, I just want to thank you so much for just being such a fantastic observer and just linking everything in such a magnificent way. And without you, honestly, this wouldn't have happened. So thank you very much, Thembinkosi, for just being superb. And it's without a doubt you're gifted in everything that you do. And I also want to thank Heidi. I also want to thank Athi. I also want to thank Hlonipha, because you've added different layers within this whole entire discussion. And even going forward, people are going to think in different ways because of what you guys have given to us. So I thank you for sharing your time with us in this way. And Pitika, obviously, you are everything right now. So I think you've inspired us. And like what Thembinkosi said, without you, this wouldn't have happened. And obviously to the gallery, thank you so much. You know where my heart is. Love you all. Kumi, Craig, Clint, Mike Lesejo, and even with the National Arts Festival, I think it's also important to acknowledge that without them as well, this also wouldn't have happened, as well as obviously the collaborators who also took the time to respond to the bones and to take the time to actually understand what it is that Pitika wanted to say, and even myself and our different ways of understanding even with art fundi, etc. So yeah, and not to mention the attendees. Thank you for those who stayed on for how many hours, I don't know, but thank you so much for listening to us and even sharing your thoughts and comments, and even your questions were more than what I expected. So thank you very much to everyone. And yeah, I hope you must please log into the exhibition and actually see what Pitika has made and onto the gallery. So as Kumi said in the beginning, it's on www.themaresgallery.com. So yeah, that's all from me.
On that note, then again, I just want to thank everyone and thank Ruzy. Thank for the audience who are popping up comments, even those who are quiet and those who are debating behind the scene. And it's true, we have exhausted what is usually the webinar. We are going back to the ground, because when we do panels, it's like seminars. So. And as perhaps would say, it's African time. So we do African time the way we want. We do it in a fella style, you know, fella Kuti stretches the time of the song. These 3 minutes are too short for us. As Bob Marley would say, we have so much things to say. But for now, we'll pause, right? And say, hopefully there will be also another opportunity to break bread in a different setup, but with similar issues. That said, again, I just want to thank everyone and thank the institution and so forth. Please, for those who will be like doing whatever tonight, do it safely, because we want to see you again. That said, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I almost took from no call of good woman, then that's grand. Yeah, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
Hlonipha.
Bye.
Bye,
Thank you so much.
Kevin.
Good night.
Bye, Athi. Bye, Thembeka.
Bye, Prof. Bye.
Bye, Ruzy.
Bye, Athi. Bye, Heidi. Bye, Hlonipha. Bye, Thembinkosi. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you, everyone. And congratulations to everyone that was part of this.